Lydia Bennett arrives at Blackwood Cemetery as night falls. The scene shows the cemetery shrouded in fog, with old, crumbling headstones and tangled vines. The cemetery office is a small, dilapidated building with a flickering light bulb. The sky is dark, with only the moon providing a pale, eerie glow. Inside the office, Lydia sets up her desk. The room is dimly lit by a single bulb, with shadows casting long shapes on the walls. The desk is cluttered with items like a logbook and a thermos of coffee. Lydia looks anxious, preparing for her shift. Lydia steps outside for her patrol. The fog is thick and creates an almost impenetrable barrier, obscuring the view. Her flashlight cuts through the mist, revealing shadowy gravestones and old mausoleums. The scene is eerily quiet, with only the occasional distant owl hoot. Lydia approaches the old section of the cemetery where she hears faint whispers. The scene shows Lydia standing among ancient, weather-beaten graves with fog swirling around. The whispers are represented by ghostly, translucent shapes or mist around the gravestones. Lydia sees a shadowy figure emerging from the fog. The figure is tall and indistinct, with an unsettling, ethereal quality. Lydia's flashlight flickers as the figure advances towards her. Her fearful expression is highlighted by the eerie, shifting light. Lydia rushes back to the office, slamming the door shut and locking it. Inside, the office is dimly lit, with shadows cast by the weak light bulb. Lydia looks visibly shaken, sitting at the desk with her head in her hands. The whispers are now a distant murmur outside. Lydia steps outside again, armed with a heavy flashlight. She faces the spectral figure in the mausoleum's chamber, which is now more defined, a skeletal form in tattered robes. The figure's ghostly presence fills the chamber, and the whispers have turned into a clear, repeated message. Leave this place. Lydia flees through the cemetery, the fog and shadows creating a nightmarish landscape. The flashlight beam cuts through the darkness as she races towards the cemetery gates. Her terrified expression reflects her desperate attempt to escape the pursuing apparition. Lydia stands outside the cemetery gates at dawn, looking back with a mixture of relief and fear. The fog is lifting, and the first light of day is breaking through. The cemetery appears calm, but Lydia's expression shows the lingering impact of her harrowing experience.
The scene depicts the entrance to Gray's Hollow Cemetery at twilight. The old iron gates, slightly rusted and covered in ivy, creak as they swing open. The cemetery is enveloped in a deepening dusk, with the last light of day fading away. The surrounding area is overgrown, with tombstones partially obscured by wild vines and weeds. The office, a small, dilapidated shack made of rotting wood, is situated near the entrance, its single bulb casting a weak, flickering light through the dusty window. Inside the office, the atmosphere is dark and claustrophobic. A single, dim light bulb hangs from the ceiling, casting a yellowish glow. The room is filled with shadows and dust. There's a small desk with a thermos of coffee and an open book, with Simon Brooks huddled under a worn blanket. The window shows a view of the dark cemetery, with the iron fence rattling in the wind outside. Simon steps outside into the cemetery, his flashlight piercing the dense darkness. The whispering voices are barely visible, represented by vague, swirling mists or shadowy tendrils around the tombstones. The scene is eerie, with the flashlight beam revealing the towering silhouettes of old, weathered headstones and crypts, the whispers seeming to swirl around them like ghostly apparitions. Simon approaches the ancient mausoleum, its door slightly ajar. The structure appears ominous, with crumbling stonework and overgrown ivy. The surrounding darkness seems to deepen as Simon's flashlight reveals strange, cryptic symbols etched into the walls. The scene inside the mausoleum is shadowy, with the stone sarcophagus prominently displayed in the center, its lid partially open. Inside the mausoleum, Simon opens the sarcophagus, revealing a decayed skeleton lying in a twisted position among the bones. The scene is unsettling, with the flashlight beam casting eerie shadows over the remains. The moment Simon touches a small, weathered book lying among the bones, a gust of cold wind extinguishes the flashlight, plunging the scene into darkness. In the pitch-black mausoleum, the flashlight flickers back on to reveal a ghastly skeletal hand emerging from the sarcophagus. The face of a long-dead corpse, with hollow eyes and an expression of malevolent hunger, is visible. The atmosphere is filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, with the skeletal hand reaching out towards Simon. Simon runs from the mausoleum, stumbling through the cemetery in a desperate attempt to escape. The night is pitch black, with only the beam of the flashlight guiding him. The shadows of tombstones and trees loom large, creating a sense of disorientation and panic. The scene should convey Simon's frantic rush and the looming darkness of the cemetery. Simon is back in the office, slamming the door shut and locking it. The scene inside is tense, with Simon's face showing a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Outside, the cemetery is still and silent, but an uneasy feeling lingers. The atmosphere inside the office contrasts sharply with the eerie calm of the cemetery.
Alan Hughes arrives at Whitmore Cemetery as twilight fades. The scene shows the expansive Gothic cemetery, shrouded in dense fog, with overgrown grass and old weathered headstones, creating ghostly silhouettes. The office, a small dilapidated building with a flickering light bulb, stands at the entrance. Inside the office, Alan sits at a cluttered desk with a thermos of coffee and an old logbook. The room is dimly lit by a single bulb, with shadows cast on the walls. Alan looks uneasy, wrapped in his coat, as he prepares for his shift. Alan steps outside into the foggy cemetery, his flashlight cutting through the dense mist. The scene shows him walking among the tall, looming gravestones and mausoleums, with the fog creating eerie, shifting shadows around him. The cemetery is eerily quiet, except for the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Alan approaches the oldest section of the cemetery, where the whispering starts. The scene shows him standing among ancient, weather-beaten graves, with the fog swirling around him. The whispers are faint, represented by ghostly translucent shapes or mist around the gravestones. Alan notices a shadowy figure emerging from the fog. The figure is tall and indistinct, with a shifting, ethereal quality. Alan's flashlight flickers and dims as the figure approaches. The scene should show Alan's fearful expression as he sees the menacing silhouette.
Alan rushes back to the office, slamming the door shut and locking it. Inside, the room is still, with only the dim light bulb providing illumination. The whispers are now a distant murmur outside. Alan looks visibly shaken, sitting at the desk with his head in his hands.
Alan steps outside again, armed with a heavy flashlight. The figure is now more defined, a skeletal form in tattered robes. The scene captures the ghostly apparition raising an arm, and the whispers coalescing into a clear phrase, "Leave this place." Alan is depicted in a state of panic, desperately trying to confront or escape the apparition. Alan is fleeing through the cemetery, with the fog and shadows creating a disorienting and nightmarish landscape. The flashlight beam cuts through the darkness as he races toward the cemetery gates. The scene conveys his frantic attempt to escape and the oppressive atmosphere of the cemetery. Alan stands outside the cemetery gates at dawn, looking back with a mixture of relief and fear. The fog is lifting, and the first light of day is breaking through. The cemetery is now calm and silent, but Alan's expression shows the lingering impact of his experience. Evan Mallory arrives at Eastwood Cemetery just as twilight turns to darkness. The cemetery is vast and eerie, shrouded in a thick fog. The entrance is marked by ancient wrought iron gates, and the cemetery office, a small, dilapidated building, stands ominously at the edge. Inside the office, Evan settles into his shift. The room is dimly lit by a single bulb, casting long shadows. The desk is cluttered with items like a logbook and a thermos of coffee. Evan looks anxious as he reviews the logbook, setting the scene for a tense atmosphere. Evan begins his patrol through the cemetery. The fog is thick and disorienting, obscuring much of the view. His flashlight beam cuts through the dense mist, revealing shadowy gravestones and mausoleums. The scene is quiet and unsettling. Evan approaches the older section of the cemetery, where he starts hearing faint, mournful whispers. The fog swirls around ancient, weather-beaten graves. The whispers seem to come from all directions, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Evan encounters a shadowy figure emerging from the fog. The figure is tall and indistinct, with an ethereal, menacing presence. Evan's flashlight flickers, creating a haunting effect as he faces the figure. Evan enters an old mausoleum where he encounters a skeletal figure and hears increasingly frantic whispers. The mausoleum is dark and musty, with stone walls lined with ancient coffins. The whispers are now a coherent plea for help. As Evan reaches for an old book inside the sarcophagus, the temperature drops and his flashlight goes out. The apparition becomes more defined, skeletal and ghostly. The wailing and whispers intensify, creating a chilling, haunted scene.
Evan flees through the foggy cemetery, with the apparition's footsteps echoing behind him. The scene captures his desperate run towards the cemetery gates, the fog and shadows creating a disorienting and nightmarish landscape. At dawn, Evan stands outside the cemetery gates, looking back with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The fog is lifting, and the cemetery appears calm and serene, though Evan's expression reveals the lasting impact of his harrowing night.
The scene depicts the entrance to Everwood Cemetery at dusk. The old iron gates, partially rusted and covered in ivy, stand slightly open. The cemetery is shrouded in the fading light of day, with tall, overgrown grass and aged, weather-beaten headstones scattered throughout. The office, a small, creaky wooden shack, is dimly lit by a single hanging bulb, casting a weak light through the dusty window. Inside the office, the space is dark and unwelcoming. A single, dim light bulb illuminates the room, casting long shadows. The room is sparsely furnished with a desk cluttered with a thermos of coffee and an open book. Emily Carter, the protagonist, is wrapped in a blanket, sitting at the desk with a concerned look on her face. The window shows the dark, foreboding cemetery outside. Emily steps outside into the cemetery, holding a flashlight that cuts through the dense darkness. The cemetery is shrouded in eerie shadows, with headstones and crypts looming in the dim light. The whispering voices are represented by ghostly, swirling mists or faint, translucent shapes around the gravestones, creating a sense of disorientation and dread. Emily approaches the ancient mausoleum, which appears old and dilapidated. The stone structure is cracked and covered in ivy. The heavy iron door is slightly ajar, and inside the corridor is dark and filled with dusty niches holding old coffins. Emily's flashlight reveals strange, cryptic symbols etched into the walls, creating an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. Inside the mausoleum's chamber, Emily discovers the sarcophagus with its lid partially open. The inside of the sarcophagus reveals a decayed skeleton in a grotesque pose. Next to the skeleton lies a small weathered book. The flashlight illuminates the scene with eerie shadows, creating a sense of horror and dread. In complete darkness, Emily's flashlight flickers back on to reveal a horrifying spectral figure. The figure is skeletal, with hollow eyes and a face contorted in anguish. The ghostly apparition is emerging from the sarcophagus, creating a terrifying and oppressive presence. The atmosphere is filled with a sense of imminent danger and supernatural dread. Emily runs frantically through the cemetery, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The shadows of the gravestones and trees loom large, creating a disorienting and nightmarish landscape. Emily's expression is one of sheer panic as she stumbles over the uneven ground, desperately trying to escape. Emily is back in the office, visibly shaken and exhausted. She has slammed the door shut and locked it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The office is still, with only the weak light of the bulb illuminating the room. Outside, the cemetery is silent and foreboding, but the oppressive feeling of fear lingers.
As the final echoes of the tale fade into the darkness, remember this: in the shadows where fear takes root, the true horror lies not in the creatures that lurk, but in the darkness within ourselves. We tell these stories not just to scare or entertain, but to confront the fears that we try so hard to ignore. So as you step back into the light of the real world, carry with you the lessons of the night. The monsters we create are reflections of our deepest anxieties, and the strength to overcome them is within each of us. Sleep well, and remember, in the realm of fear, we are the true masters of our fate. Good night, and may your dreams be free of shadows. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and click the notification bell for you to see my future update on this channel. Stay safe and always remember to lock your doors.